This video is sponsored by Crimson Manifesto, Knuckles OX, Zach Haji, Jopi, and Baba Snake. If Yuji ate Mahito is an extremely interesting question that really only came up for me as Shibuya has been adapted and the wolf and rabbit imagery expanded upon, since by this point it feels like a very near canon what if. It being so interesting on top of that because there are really only so many different conclusions one could make considering all the unknown variables we still have going for us. So it's only certain that this would be a scenario with multiple routes and options, all just as equally interesting or impactful as the last. For example, if we just look at the most beneficial and optimistic route for the good guys in Yuji, this could possibly just result in Yuji snagging and twisting auto configuration for himself, and thus getting a big power boost in the process. And considering the fact this would be a showing of such ego and audacity, I kinda think Sukuna would just allow it, as he just kinda seems to respect that in other people. Plus, Yuji by this point already has an innate understanding of the technique as well as the nature of the soul, so adding idle configuration to his stats and abilities already, as well as his affinity for syncing up with and jumping opponents, he'd evolve a lot farther than Mahito was likely ever planned to. Beyond this, it would at the very least screw up Kenjaku's plans, and would allow Yuji to better keep his vow to exercise Mahito no matter how many times it takes. So with my first crack of the concept as a super mini out of the way, I'd like to do my best to address points brought up in the comments. Kenjaku more than likely already has a contingency for some scenario where he completely loses Mahito, or at the very least he can restructure his plans to heavily target Yuji, or he may even have a curse that can manipulate Yuji, meaning the whole eating Mahito thing could all be for nothing, which is fair, but this also means that Yuji's allies will protect him harder, and a prime target also means that Kenjaku's attacks would be far more predictable, which would make him extra vulnerable if someone like Yuki capitalizes on this, or even if the actual consumption of Mahito starts healing or buffing Yuji immediately, as that would make him much more wily. He was also mega locked in during the canon battle, and while he was overpowered, he wasn't really helped by his exhaustion, so you can give him a mental lamp on top of that, even if you don't immediately grant him something like a budding use of idle transfiguration. So I think it would still be an unwanted roadblock for Kenjaku no matter how you approach it. Yuji consuming Mahito is just as likely to end Mahito's death as in canon anyway, since Sukuna probably wouldn't allow it and wouldn't be willing to coexist with Mahito, even despite them having gotten along once, as he already doesn't seek coexistence with Yuji or anyone else really. This is extremely fair, and likely the most noteworthy critique of the original short scenario, though personally, I don't think it's all that relevant, especially in the realms of a pure hypothetical, rather than something presented as my headcanon or how I think it should have gone, as I do think it's very much an in-character statement to say Sukuna does seek entertainment. Beyond that, so much of this series already comes down to characters making gambles on drastically short periods of time or infinitesimal chances of success, with them more often than not working or failing for the sake of advancing the plot and being hyped. So it's not exactly so outside their own possibility for the concepts I suggested in the original Super Media to take place, that Sukuna may respect Yuji's assertiveness and selfishness in this situation, and depending on how things go, you could actually see the roles reversed, where it's more Mahito becoming to Yuji as Yuji is to Sukuna, so the consumption may be more literal than you expect. The I am you line has a totally different interpretation if it's not just the acceptance of Yuji's place in a society of killers, but also builds on that prey and predator image connected with it, and that he views this as a necessity of nature, and thus relinquishes his hatred toward Mahito in the act of making him a part of his own flesh and spirit, so that he can not only eliminate the threat he poses for good, like with Sukuna, but also add to his strength and fuel his ambitions without the need to rely on cursed energy itself. Plus, if you interpret it this way, Mahito's consciousness could easily just fade away, meaning there wouldn't be a Mahito to coexist with, just an in Sukuna's eyes, more respectable and entertaining Yuji Itadori, so the status quo isn't shifted so drastically yet. And the rest of the comments were either algorithm fuel or people saying they'd like to see a full story, but I think that's because it truly does feel like one of those actively possible scenarios Akutami could have decided to roll with had they just got up on a different side of the bed. Plus, it's an admittedly hype-ass idea with interesting consequences, so we will explore the ones I think are the most fun and logical to think of. Say a good and most optimistic, neutral, and bad and most pessimistic timeline. So, starting out with the good route, this probably has some of the most to discuss. Here, after their battle, Yuji consumes Mahito completely before Kenjaku arrives, leaving him absolutely nothing to reclaim, whilst the younger sorcerer also experiences no adverse effects from the dark deed. In fact, the contrary, by quite possibly getting significantly stronger in a short period of time, despite how tired he is from the battle so far, since his body is already kinda canonically hyper-adaptable, on top of his having a usually pretty sturdy willpower. And as he's already ingested a much more potent curse as well, I think Mahito's consciousness in this route would either fade into its state of complete non-existence, or maybe dormancy. It means Kenjaku can at the very least not use Mahito in his Uzumaki, which also means it'll do less damage to his opponents and give them more time to pressure him in Shibuya, which could in turn give some form of opportunity for Satoru Gojo to be released early, which if happened, would pretty simply be an immediate and unavoidable loss for him. This is also not even to take note of the more interesting possible side effects of the titular consumption of Mahito, as the implications of it could mean a lot more things means than just Mahito is gone. It could result in Yuji's personal curse technique developing as something consumption, absorption, and assimilation based, in a similar vein to Yuji's copying or Maharaga's adaptation. In being an avid reader of Jump with his new extremely locked-in mindset, Yuji would probably get a confidence boost knowing he may not be able to shoot a Kamehameha or give his curse energy the properties of rubber and gum. But even so, being the equivalent of Meruem or Perfect Cell is even better, as it likely means he can in fact take something from Sukuna as well. Speaking of, in this route, he could quite easily learn to transfigure and transform himself, and others, a goal he would have almost immediately in the eating of Mahito, as the possibility to somehow save the patch-faced prick's victims is much more than Yuji could have hoped for, at least before the battle, when completely prepared to die in atonement for the blood on his hands, as such a feat could possibly allow him to help heal Todo and Nobara. Speaking of that, another one, by the time Choso joins the fight, and quite possibly ends up teaming up with Itadori and Todo, the fact that Choso used convergence on Yuji so much, even to the point of leaving parts of his own body inside him as ballistics, it's quite possible Yuji could also ingest that tooth and therefore part of Choso, allowing him to also pick up the blood convergence technique way early in the process. And if that technique is combined with any of the abilities Mahito used in his own body in combat, Yuji would be pulling off some wicked Deadman Wonderland style combos, like forming his arms into a high caliber rifle to fire a concentrated blood bullet from, or increasing the length of blades he's created from his body with blood. And by the time he learns reverse curse technique, he could be trying out moves Andy and Victor pull off in Undead Unluck by leveraging his self-healing despite how impressive some of those higher feats are in that verse. If any of this were to be the case, much less all of it, Yuji could at least in theory become the most important part of this battle, not just as a win condition for Kenjaku, but because of his massive tactical, combat, and possibly even recovery and medical value in the same league as Shoko. Since again, wounds like Todo's could pretty much be all but reversed, allowing him to feel the beat of Boogie Woogie to join the battle once again. And considering he can already sync up with Yuji regardless of circumstances, and fought Mahito himself, that means this immediately more dangerous Itadori would now also be far more mobile and reinforced. If this concept is taken to its extreme, Yuji could also make his own allies out of enemy sorcerers, or even non-sorcerers by manipulating their brains, meaning had this change occurred back in Junpei's school with enough timing and finesse, Yuji could have brought about a much brighter future for his fallen friend, which just the passing thought of would serve as great motivation to obtain such an ability, since even in this most optimistic route, he likely will be unable to do something that complex immediately, but still, a great deal of his allies who've been wounded could really benefit from even the most meager assistance to help them get into stable states. And at worst, Yuji could also split himself into a pair of clones, so one him can serve right alongside Shoko with her exact instructions on how to essentially perform surgery with idle transfiguration, which could quite easily see Megumi and Nobara get back in the fight as well, which is again for Kenjaku not great by any means, as these are all factors which increase the chances of Gojo's prison realm being captured. This means he'll eventually be forced to make a full-on stand here, just like the good guys are trying to do in order to seize and manipulate Mahito through Yuji, which in turn could just as easily result in a newly evolved chimeric form of Mahito far beyond the scope of his previous hopes for the spirit. Or Kenjaku must completely abandon his major objectives concerning Lord Tengen through this route, at least for now, a prospect which means sacrificing a great deal of time and effort, and this carries its own set of risks on both sides, even with the aid of Uraume and Yuki on the way for both. Eventually, the battle becomes a deadlock that gives on into being full-on overwhelmed, which will result in worse losses for Kenjaku as the sorcerers against him have more methods to recover their strength and aid each other than he does, and so he is forced to pull away for that time. Thus, he is also unable to use idle transfiguration to transfigure the brains of non-sorcerers to set up the culling game as we know it. This act lightly staving and often really ruining his plans and drastically shifting the course of the entire series from what we actually know so far into something purely unrecognizable, at least in structure, since by this point even Kenjaku's aid may not be able to so cleanly help him escape. From here, things are likely to evolve into something very much like the culling games, but likely still played on the political divides and intrigues within Jujutsu society. For example, I could easily see Naoya Zenin maybe having some sneaky deals with Kenjaku running just to make him more of a bastard, but because the series is still running and I have such a narrow scope of it, my mind pretty quickly drums up different ways to bring about the culling games, or else see things in a pretty idealized manner. There is still intrigue here, since despite all the issues mounted against him right now, Yuji would have another use to the world than just being a destiny bond for a couple of Sukuna fingers, but things like Sukuna's greater plot, for example, may not have as much oomph to them, since things would likely still boil down to a group battle against him, where he's simply at a steeper disadvantage. So with the good out of the way, let's explore the bad. If things were to go the most pessimistic route though, the consumption of Mahito as suggested in comments likely results in no power increase for Yuji. In fact, here, even angering Sukuna to either harm or sabotage Yuji more immediately, or even attempt to take over from him again, with the goal of wiping out his allies and turning him over to Kenjaku anyway, at which point, the concept of Mahito's consciousness fading away is probably reversed, with Kenjaku simply having free reign to draw Mahito out, absorbing him, and allowing him to start the culling game in his leisure, and have no one to really oppose him, but but Yuta Okkotsu, along with the dregs of the Jujutsu High Sorcerers and disciples of Suguru Geto that he can gather to fight alongside him and Yuji. And considering the crew already just barely holds on through the games as in canon, that would be pretty detrimental, more than likely leading to Kenjaku fusing with Tengen and resulting in whatever vaguely horrible outcome that it brings about. So in this exercise, we've seen that the most optimistic and pessimistic views both lean too hard into one extreme of one side having a large advantage over the other. So pretty evidently, a middle path is probably the best explored for a true story that picks up and drops certain aspects from both routes, such as Yuji having an upper limit or skill ceiling when it comes to successfully consuming Mahito and gaining auto transfiguration. We will, however, drop the consumption curse technique idea, since at least with the examples I listed, none are that different from ability he's already displaying in canon right now. So I may not even be too far off that idea considering his connections to Kenjaku and Sukuna. We'll also drop Sukuna having an actual issue with the eating and gaining of power, since again, you cannot deny it is entertaining, and neither would Sukuna in my opinion. As a part of that though, we will also keep Kenjaku being somewhat successful and snagging say a large enough fragment of Mahito to still complete his goals. Though another way to balance that is just splitting Mahito into a kind of right brain and left brain way, with the half Kenjaku gets being the part of Mahito that knows how to transfigure others, while Yuji gets the half that knows how to change the self, which in turn does lock some of Yuji's more broken abilities away. That is, unless he's able to steal the other half away from Kenjaku, and vice versa, also meaning Kenjaku disengages before they can get Gojo out. So all in all, not too big a change from canon, other than Yuji having some new abilities, which I'm aware is pretty superficial as a change. With this as the case, our true story obviously begins in the defeat of Mahito, as Yuji walks him down with a poker face, a myriad of negative emotions running through his mind, as he resolves to not only end this curse's rampage, but its entire existence, the same as he will one day do with Sukuna. And so instead of kicking Mahito away, Yuji Itadori lunges upon him like a ravenous wolf, as he begins the act of devouring him in acceptance that they truly are the same, and now shall be as one. When Kenjaku arrives, it is to this horrifying sight, nearly not recognizing this as the happy-go-lucky brat who'd willingly made himself a vessel for Sukuna. Regardless though, he must act quickly, and so he dives into the fray, attempting to save his creation as best he can, and only succeeding in retrieving the half that is left, as in his frenzy, Yuji tears away and scarfs down the other parts of the body furiously. And so enraged by this, Kenjaku forces a spirit to cause the boy to hallucinate and lose his balance, though as he feels the sensation in his very soul, Yuji just as quickly recovers, forming his body a bit grotesquely into a near wheel shape to simply roll through this fall and gain speed to hit the enemy hard, revealing his already having a decent grasp of applying auto transfiguration to himself from his clash with the Mahito and understanding of the soul, as the force of this blow is enough to knock him back far, thanks to the spirit under his control taking the brunt of it, and subsequently dies, giving Kenjaku pause, while from inside him, as he watches the manifestation of what remains of Mahito become subsumed by Yuji, much as he seeks to do to him, Sukuna can't help but find it hilarious this is the patchwork face curse's fate, and that brat would go off the deep end so hard for seeing one little city dismantled. As stated before, with the other forces arriving in the battle, a deadlock is formed, in which Kenjaku and Uraume decide it best to pull back, with their goals for the most part completed and their losses as minimal as possible from there on out, with the results of the Shibuya Incident for the moment being the transfiguration of Japan's non-sorcerers to begin the culling game, confirmation of Geto/Kenjaku's survival, and being sentenced to death again, Gojo being deemed and accomplished in the Shibuya Incident and being ousted from the Jujutsu world. At the same time, the act of freeing him is declared criminal, and Principal Yaga receives the death penalty, along with the suspension of Yuji's own death sentence being revoked, the execution instead being set to be carried out ASAP rather than immediately, as making sure Kenjaku doesn't get the other half of Mahito on top of killing Sukuna will be a top priority. Finally, special grade sorcerer Yuta Okkotsu is appointed Itadori's execution. But that is where we'll be leaving this story, at least for now. So I hope my first real attempt at a Jujutsu Kaisen What If was enjoyable, even as much more of a setup or chapter 0 style to just better explore the basic premise of the scenario, since I kind of approach this in the vein I see most power scalers try to tell stories in. Though that said, from what I gather, a pretty large chunk of the JJK fanbase are either pretty active manga readers like me who are caught up, or they at least consume content edits and memes that can be pretty spoiler heavy. So I'm pretty sure no one watching this would really mind me getting to the culling games in depth before the anime does, especially with a warning beforehand. But this way, if you guys enjoyed this one enough for more, we can start a part 2 without having to do as much theory crafting and setup, and the story and I'll get to benefit from more feedback from some of you likely more knowledgeable in the series than I am to help fix up any mistakes or inconsistencies so far. Plus, if this doesn't take off, there are also tons of other JJK what ifs. That said though, special shoutouts to my friends Pickled Dill and Mr. Negative for helping brainstorm with me, and to the supporters of the day, Balls Core, Ivan Aldana, T-Bone019, Fort Lifer, and Wayne Singleton. Thanks to these guys and everyone else who directly supports the channel for all you do. Remember to take care of yourselves and the world around you, and go beyond plus ultra. Have a nice day, and I'll see you all next time.